Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'd like to invite you to take your seats. We're going to start the program. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the 4th annual Lyon Cohen Symposium, Ethics in the Media. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. Thank you. My name is David Scott, and I serve as the Executive Director and Director of Lifelong Learning here at Congregation Beth Israel. On behalf of Rabbi Lyon and our clergy team, Bruce Levy, President of our Board of Trustees, and the entire board and staff of the congregation, we welcome you tonight. We also extend a warm welcome to those of you joining us via live stream. Welcome to you. Also joining us are members of the Ner Tamid Society, which supports the endowment of our congregation. Thank you to Lori Conti, who oversees Ner Tamid along with the endowment board. Thank you. I also wish to thank Marcy and Bob Zlotnick, without whom the Lyon Cohen Symposium would not be possible. We're so grateful to you both for your leadership and generosity that allows us to hold this event every spring, with next year's event already scheduled for April 11th, 2019. Marcy and Bob, again, please rise and be recognized. Thank you. Tonight, I invite everyone to join in our discussion as an incredible group of panelists engage with each other and with us on a very serious and timely topic, ethics in the media. With the help of our moderator, Cambrell Marshall from KPRC Channel 2, we will discuss issues that impact our secular world and further understand them through our Jewish religious tradition. We invite you to be part of this conversation. Please make sure that you have white note cards and pencils that were provided at the registration tables and on your tables tonight. We'll collect your questions throughout the evening. On your tables as well, you'll find information about our panelists, as well as a survey to complete after the program. Additionally, on the screens earlier, you had a link to an online poll with a few short questions. Please use your smartphone to answer these questions if you've not already done so, and we'll review the results shortly. Tonight's event would not have been possible without the hard work of the Lyon Cohen Committee, the Adult Education Committee, staff of the Congregation Beth Israel, the kitchen, the maintenance team, our sound engineer and live streaming staff, and all of our greeters and volunteers for helping with check-in and registration. Thank you all for your hard work to make tonight's event run so smoothly. Also joining us tonight are special guests, Professor Jay Barnhart, Dean of the Moody College of Communications at the University of Texas in Austin. Welcome. And David Mintzberg, Chair of Houston First. Welcome to you, sir. Thank you for being here. It's now my pleasure to invite Mayor Pro Tem for the City of Houston, Ellen Cohen, who will present this year's Lyon Cohen Merit Scholarship winner. Ellen, thank you for your steadfast support of this event every year and for sharing your husband's memory with us tonight. May Lyon's memory continue to be a source of blessing and comfort to you and your entire family. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Ellen Cohen and Bob Zlotnick.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for being here. I'm honored to have the opportunity of presenting the Lyon Cohen Merit Scholarship established by my children, Marcy and Bob Zlotnick. Lyon was a man of extraordinary principles, great courage, and intellectual curiosity. Our scholarship winner tonight shares those values. In answering the question on the competitive application process, she demonstrated the capacity as a junior at Tufts to maintain a 3.4 average in her chosen field, astrophysics. I'm just lucky I can pronounce it. In fact, in the spring of 2017, a Tufts physics professor and she studied, pay attention, there'll be a question here, correlations between experimental and simulated data of electron scattering to correct for error in neutrino scattering stimulations. We get it? Okay. While at the same time she was studying the error in neutrino scattering stimulations, she was tutoring a student, volunteering at Read by the River and Halloween on the Hill, which supports neighborhood children. She was volunteering for the Gift of Life, a bone marrow registry, and acting as a big sister with the Big Sister Association. Her guiding principle, and one shared by Lyon, is that of tikkun olam, to repair the world. She notes that Rabbi Tarfon taught, and Lyon clearly would have agreed, it's not your responsibility to finish the work of perfecting the world, but you are not free to desist from it either. Our recipient is not here this evening as she is studying abroad this semester in Madrid. Of course she is. But joining us and accepting on behalf of Danielle Rose Golub are her parents, Stephanie Shapiro and Andrew Golub. Please join me. This is for you. Go ahead. You want to say something?
We're accepting for our daughter, who cannot be here for the reasons that Ellen said, and we just want to express on her behalf our gratitude that she's the recipient of this scholarship. It's an enormous honor, and it will also help her financially this summer. She's researching for her thesis in astrophysics with a physics professor, so the award of the scholarship will be of tremendous aid to her. And I know she's planning to meet with Marcy when she gets back to learn more about Lyon Cohen personally. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And over my long life, I've had an opportunity to be introduced by a variety of names, most of which I can repeat, some I cannot. But I've been the executive director, I've been the chief operating officer, I've been the CEO, been a Texas legislator, the council member, and now I'm mayor pro tem. But frankly, those all pale in comparison to the title I think is really the most meaningful to me and touches me the deepest. I am Marcy Cohen Zlotnick's mother, and I'd now like to introduce my daughter, Marcy Cohen Zlotnick.
Thank you, Mom. I appreciate that. And yes, I look forward to meeting Danielle when she gets back. I thought maybe she could use a little tip on astrophysics. You know, maybe I could help her out a little bit. You know, we'll see. It's immensely rewarding to be here at our 4th annual Lyon Cohen Symposium. I have no doubt that my father is watching. Maybe he's even live streaming. You know, who knows? Tonight's event would not be possible without the guidance, assistance, and work of so many. Let me echo David's earlier appreciation to the Beth Israel staff, including Gabby and Marcia. We would not be here, and this would not be as wonderful it is without them. So thank you so much. I'd also like to recognize the Lyon Cohen Symposium Committee. This dedicated group of highly professional, extremely talented individuals, what I consider the dream team, they have worked tirelessly to ensure tonight's event is informative, relevant, and goes off without a hitch. Warren Rich, Anita Gaylor, Phyllis Cohen, David Scott, Bobby Lapin, Daniel Gerber, Jacob Lyon, Lisa Stanton, and David Hasted, would you please all rise so we can show you our appreciation? The media. Growing up, my family read the Montreal Gazette, which was delivered to us probably around 5 a.m. in the morning. And schedule permitting, we also watched the nightly news. In 1983, as a recent college graduate, my go-to news source was The Today Show. Those 30 minutes between 7 to 7:30 a.m. kept me informed on issues facing not only the U.S., but the world. And that was pretty much the way it remained for me for the next 20 years. Pew Research confirmed that my source of news was the norm back in 2000. 86% of Americans got their news from TV, with 40% from print, radio at 14%, and online just a meager 7%. And now I know some of you are saying that adds up to more than 100%. And with, Honesty and no fake news. That's right, because people were allowed more than one choice. But today, that same analysis shows television has dropped from 86% to 57%. Online sources at 38%, radio at 25%, and print dropped 20%. So this is technology at its best. Let's see. Where do you get your news from? Let's see how it plays out from our online survey that you guys helped do. We'll see if modern technology works. Well, I can see it, but I can't see. We need to zoom out a little bit. Well, okay, well, let's do this. Do me a favor, raise your hand if you, it's always good to go back to the old-fashioned, or is it truly all coming in at TV? That's what it says. Okay. So, well, I'm going to say it's upwards of 90% of you have listed TV as your primary source of media. And while your responses may appear to contradict the Pew Research, keep in mind that those numbers were for all age groups. For the over 50 age group, which I am, and I think most of us are, the Pew numbers actually indicate that 75% of us, and we can see at least that, still watch TV as our primary source of news. It's our alternate source that has changed dramatically. In 2000, only 3% listed online sources. As of 2016, it went up to 30%, and I'm sure in 2018, it's significantly more than that. With this change in where we get our news from comes a slew of challenges we see playing out every single day. Fortunately, we have 5 incredibly knowledgeable, insightful, and not at all shy panelists who graciously agreed to share their insights with us. To my far right, spiritual advisor to many of us, and senior rabbi at Beth Israel, Rabbi David Lyon. Engaging and innovative director of the Center for Media Engagement and associate professor of communication studies and journalism at Moody College of Communications, Talia Stroud. With over a quarter century of cutting-edge journalism, and presently CEO of the Texas Tribune, which he co-founded in 2009, Evan Smith. Provocative and acclaimed editorialist for the Houston Chronicle, Lisa Falkenberg. Highly regarded broadcaster for Channel 2 News, panelist, and our moderator for this evening's discussion, Cambrell Marshall. Thank you all so much for your participation, not just tonight, but on all of our pre-conference calls and email discussions. My father was a man who valued ethics above all else. You truly helped to honor his legacy by joining us here tonight. And I can't thank you all enough for joining and being here tonight. Cambrell, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. I couldn't help but smile a little bit when she said, Evan, a quarter of a century. I said, well, that's old. No. So we want to start by asking each of the panelists here just to give a little bit, a minute maybe, about who you are, what you do, and your perspective on the media in general. That's pretty broad, I know, but that'll get us started. Rabbi?
Well, from a rabbinic point of view, I'm not published in the newspaper. I'm not in front of the television cameras, but I will tell you that the media has played a significant role in the rabbinate today because we are not only pulpiteers who speak to the audience that enters a sanctuary bound by the walls surrounding us, but we are now live streaming to thousands of people at high holidays and hundreds over Shabbat. Online media presentation this month through the Union for Reform Judaism. I'm writing commentaries on the book of Leviticus, which are going to about 30,000 emails. And I'm now hearing from people around the country with questions and comments. So in brief, I can tell you that the role of the rabbinate that exists here in Houston, or in whatever city a rabbi might serve, or any preacher in any place, really does go well beyond the walls. And we are now responsible for and committed to the ethics of media, which should be grounded and tethered, to use a modern word today, tethered to something authentic and serious for those who consider the relationships we have not only to each other, but also to our God and all the ways that we imagine God to be something important to our message.
Hi, I'm Talia Stroud. I'm on the faculty at UT Austin in the Moody College of Communication, and I also direct the Center for Media Engagement. And our mission there is how can we work with news organizations to help them meet both their business and democratic goals. And when I look at the media today, I see two issues that I think are really important for us to address. The first is the increasing role of partisanship in the media marketplace and how people are making decisions about which media outlets to attend to on the basis of their partisan identities. And the second is the changes in the local media landscape, where you see far fewer newspaper staff today than there once were. And I think that this contraction of the amount of local news reporting is something that should worry us as American citizens and as we think to the future of how the media can play a role in helping democracy and advancing those ideals. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here as well. This is fantastic.
Okay, I'm Evan Smith. I am the CEO of the Texas Tribune. I spent 18 years at Texas Monthly Magazine before starting the Tribune in 2009, the last 9 years as the editor of the magazine. And to Talia's point about the decline in the number of reporters in Texas, and not just in Texas, I made the decision to leave Texas Monthly to start a new online, nonpartisan news organization as a response to what we all believed was a lack of coverage of politics and public policy in the state of Texas. Very important topics that affect all, what is now 28.3 million people in the state, affected by every decision made by people in state government. But people are not really aware in large measure of what goes on in Austin at the Capitol. They don't know who represents them. They don't know the fights that are being waged over things like school finance and immigration, healthcare, and they certainly don't know the stakes that they have in the outcomes of those fights. So we created a news organization for the simple purpose of telling people what's going on in the state of Texas. And I believe that journalism is a public service. This is a public service profession. We do work in the public interest. Our job is to make people in the state better informed, more productive, and thoughtful citizens. We have the worst voter turnout in Texas over the last 4 elections of any state in the country. And one of the reasons that we have such low voter turnout is people don't know what's going on enough to be motivated to participate civically. So the decision to start the Texas Tribune was in part a reaction to the fact that all over this state, one end to the other, people have checked out. And we're working hard now for a little bit more than 8 years to try to get people back into a regular conversation with their friends and neighbors about the things that matter. And hopefully today we'll talk about the importance of the work that we all do to try to give people fair, thorough, and accurate information, and by doing so, make this a better state and all of us better Texans.
Lisa?
Yes, and I'm Lisa Falkenberg. I'm a Metro columnist at the Houston Chronicle. Before that, I was a reporter for the Associated Press. I covered a few sessions in Austin, and I write about, I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, write about politics, immigration, healthcare, education, criminal justice, occasionally my children. And it's a difficult time in the newspaper industry. There's still a lot of amazing journalists that I work with at the Chronicle. When I speak, though, I get asked a lot, how much longer is the Chronicle going to be delivered to my front door? Journalism's dying. And I'll admit, the rabbi over there probably has a bigger readership than I do at this point, but or viewership, or however you want to measure it. But I think that it can't die. It will not die, or else our country dies. You cannot have a democracy without an informed citizenry, and that is what we that's what my colleagues and I and everybody up on this stage is devoted to. And I think many of you, or you would not be here. So I think things like this are so important, though, because so much is changing in our industry, and if we don't have these hard conversations, even the wonderful journalists I work with won't be aware of the ways in which perhaps some of us are affected by bias, and what we need to do to make sure that we preserve this very important institution that's vital to the survival of our country.
Okay, so he may have more viewers, but he doesn't have a Pulitzer Prize. And you do. I don't know how long we have to go before I say that, because she is a Pulitzer Prize winner, which is a big deal. Thank you for that. So I'm actually proud of her, because I'm like you, I read her stuff and I like it. So I have been here for 19 years. I've been in the business for 43 years, a combination of a sportscaster, a news anchor, executive producer, and now meteorologist, as well as hosting public affairs program. But I'm a hardcore, old school journalist. I was telling someone earlier today that my first boss told me the last 2 words he ever wanted to hear come from my mouth was, "I think," because the viewer does not care what I think. The viewer wants to know what I know about the facts. And so I also feel like journalism is being assaulted, and it is causing tremendous problems among us as a country. And I think one of the challenges is for us as journalists and purveyors of fact is to make sure that people understand what the real issues are, and hopefully we can get beyond the accusations of fake news, which muddies the waters a little bit. I'm sure we'll talk about that. We have talked before this event, we've talked on the phone, and we know that we've got 45 minutes of us and 45 minutes of you asking questions. We'll get your questions. It's going to be a challenge because we have a lot to say. And so our conversation, I want us to be very conversational, not be shy about jumping in. But I do want to get the conversation going with Talia. You've written a book called Niche News, and that was basically, what was that about, and what does it really point to as being one of the challenges in getting people into a position where they can be aware of what facts are in our communities?
So the purpose of writing the book Niche News was to really understand how people's partisanship affected where they went for news. And there are patterns that we're probably all familiar with. Republicans are far more likely to tune into Fox News. Democrats are more likely to tune in to MSNBC. And that cashes out even if you look at what websites people attend to. And I wanted to know, how often is this happening? Where are people going for news and information? And what are the consequences of these patterns? And what I found in that book, and that persists even to today, is that it's actually a significant chunk of the public is looking at news that matches their partisan beliefs. Now, it's not to say that people never look at the other side. They do sometimes, but they're not doing so with the purpose of trying to understand and respect a different point of view. They're doing so to laugh or make fun of the other side or bolster their own point of view. And the democratic consequences of this are increased levels of political polarization, people finding very different issues as being important. And the other one that I just want to throw out there that's an interesting one is, if I would have asked at the beginning of this, what makes a good citizen? For sure, someone here would have said they vote, they participate politically. Evan brought that up in his comments. And if you want to increase participation in the United States, we should be applauding partisan media. We should thank them so much, because when people attend to partisan media, they're far more likely to participate politically because it's energizing to do that. And so I think what the book really reveals is that there's something consequential happening on the basis of partisanship that has democratic implications. And we need to be really aware of how this dramatic change in our media landscape cashes out in the way that democracy progresses.
What kind of responsibility do we have? You talked about people much more active, much more likely to vote, much more likely to get out there. How is that helping if they're voting based upon erroneous information that may be out there? What role do we have to play in that? That's for anybody.
Well, I think one of the negative consequences of partisan media is that we've now got two different tribes with their own sets of facts. We used to be able to agree on a common set of facts in this country, whether you agreed or disagreed with somebody of another political party or agreed or disagreed with a candidate, at least the basic facts were not in dispute. And one of the consequences, I think, of partisan media is that we now seem to have different sets of facts that we can't even agree on. And that really forestalls any ability for us to find a common ground. This used to be a country in which people of unlike mind looked for the things that they agreed on and tried to advance something like the common good. And we have a real obstacle to that right now in the absence of a common set of facts that begin that conversation.
Could I just take issue? Some people would see this as semantics, but I think it's really important. I brought this up in the call. But I just think the word partisanship bothers me, to use this term, partisan media. Now, there are some people on cable news stations who do align themselves with parties. But I think what we're talking about here is ideology, right? I think most human beings have ideologies. And it bothers me to say the word partisan, because to me that means party. And I think we discussed, I think most serious journalists I know, professional journalists, do not align themselves with parties. And I think this is very important. And I've realized lately this is something that general population doesn't even know. But I mean, at the Chronicle, we're not allowed to attend protests. We're not allowed to be members of organizations that may seem to you very benign. I'm a columnist, and I don't count myself a member of any party. So I think that it's hard to, I think it's impossible for a journalist to cover a group if they're a member of it, right? I mean, we're jumping on the bandwagon. How do we really can see an outsider's view of what the bandwagon is up to? We should be part of the press pool following the bandwagon, but we should not be a member of it.
I don't think anybody would disagree with what you just said, but I would disagree with the premise that the cable news audiences, which, by the way, are probably larger than the Houston Chronicle's readership and the Texas Tribune's readership, that those people on those stations are not partisan. I think they very expressly are partisan, and it's a little bit hilarious when on Fox News, to pick one example, although I think you could say the same for the evening programming on MSNBC, when they present themselves as impartial journalists. I just think it's ludicrous. And I think one of the problems that we all have in our business, Lisa, I don't believe the Chronicle suffers from this. I don't think that we do, but there are people in our business who do. There's a lack of credibility in the work that we produce, and the view of our work today is significantly less trusted than it used to be. And I think in part that's because we've been lumped in with people who are less concerned about credibility than about the point of view, whether we call it ideology or partisanship.
And what's the challenge? There's a big challenge trying to make sure that you can differentiate those who are solid journalists who believe the way you just mentioned, as opposed to those folk who definitely have a dog in the hunt and are, quote, partisan, or they have an ideology.
Even on Fox News, I mean, there are people I see as journalists, I would call journalists, right? Couple. And there are people who are analysts and experts, and sure, those people are partisan, and obviously there are few hosts who are blatantly partisan. But I just think, I don't know, I worry about it because this is such tribalism, isn't it? If we can call somebody, label somebody, then you just totally disregard their opinion. My own parents, if you read my column, my parents voted for Trump. They're very conservative, and we've had some very intense debates in our family. But I remember once discussing, I think it was healthcare with my mother, and I saw this glimmer of recognition or agreement in her eyes, and then she kind of shook her head. She said, but you're a liberal. And I'm like, you're also your daughter. And so because I was making sense to her, the facts I was providing made sense logically. But then she went back, and Sean Hannity had said something, and I'm on the other side. And so because she can label me, she can disregard me, my own mother. So that's why I worry about these labels.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, each of you speaks so wisely about the circumstances that we're facing, and to a point that Evan made, There is in our Jewish background this idea that we sometimes argue for the sake of heaven. And there are two different points of view. There are always different schools of opinion. That's why there are often more than one synagogue in even a small community. There's always going to be more than one opinion. But what we decide is that while there is a different set of opinions, there isn't a different set of facts. And so underlying all of it is a basic textual foundation, and from it we can derive different opinions, but all those arguments and all those differences of opinion are for the sake of a larger good. And we agree, even as our tradition concludes, that God is pleased with the discussion and debate because it is all for the sake of that larger good, for the sake of heaven, as our tradition describes it. What we've lost a little bit, and I used the word before, is that we've become untethered from the foundations and from the facts. We've created not only our own opinions, but also our own facts, as we heard before. And it may not lead, if we follow it out properly, to the kind of discussion or differences of opinion that are for a greater good. It's a bit of a terrifying outcome and conclusion, and perhaps create some of the tension that we feel because we don't know where it's leading and what it will become. And before we came onto the stage, I raised a question. Will we snap back to a former time when some of what we're facing today ends or transitions, or is this a part of a new normal?
So, will we snap back to a time when there's no more, quote, fake news? Is that what you're...
Well, I'm not sure that we'll snap back completely like a rubber band, but I'm hoping that we can return to a time when we agree that there's an underlying environment that supports and nourishes us as Americans, and that even though we face different sets of opinions, we're arguing for a larger good. And even if that larger good means that my opinion doesn't win and yours does, that we can agree that where we are is a place where we can continue to walk together.
One of the questions is how do we get to that point? Which of our method of disseminating information is better to get that done? We have TV, local TV, we have cable. Can we agree that local TV is going to be better at getting facts to the people in the community, or is that something that you wouldn't agree with necessarily?
Unless you're a Sinclair broadcasting station.
Oh, you went there, did you?
Well, look, I mean, there's good TV and bad TV. There's good newspapers and bad newspapers. There's good online sites and bad online sites. I think if you've seen one news organization, you've seen one news organization. I think it's difficult to paint with one brush, Kimberly. I really do.
So you said Sinclair. I want to bring that up. I was going to bring it up later. But that's an example of one company giving all of their... Is everyone familiar with what Sinclair's done? One company that's given all of their anchors a script to read about certain things, but it's not necessarily news, it's ideology. That becomes a problem, and I think that undermines a lot of what those who are serious journalists have maintained. That's what we're going to do. Agree? And what's the answer to that? Because Sinclair is growing, it's not getting smaller, and their philosophy is not going to change going forward. How is that going to help or hurt the effort to make sure that we can get facts into the community?
Well, I mean, I think what Sinclair has done is it's offensive, it's shocking, and enough that it's getting, what? News coverage. And so I think that is people being educated, and the FCC, what the decisions that they're making. Basically, if Sinclair, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I think if Sinclair is able if a merger with Tribune is approved, they will then have ownership of 70% of the, basically have a station in 70% of the households that own TVs, okay? And so if they're sending a script out to be read at various parts of the day that has basically propaganda, what does that mean for the quality and the integrity of the news being published? It is frightening, and I think that the news coverage around this, if you guys aren't familiar with it, please familiarize yourself. share it, because education and knowledge is the only thing we have, and even in this situation, people know if the FCC is under pressure to, if the spotlight is on them, there's already an investigation as to whether or not Sinclair is getting special treatment by the Inspector General of the FCC. And so, I believe in journalism to air this out as well, I guess.
The part about Sinclair that really worries me is you've seen these precipitous declines in trust in the media over time. It's just declined rapidly. But local news always stood out as being this one shining beacon. Look, we can still trust local news. And what really worries me about the situation with Sinclair is now that's inserting a narrative that even local news cannot be trusted in all instances. And it just concerns me deeply that we would have a media system where there's no place where people say that is trustworthy. And I think that this is an attack on one of those pivotal parts of the media that had that trust that I don't think will after this is publicized more and more and more.
In my lifetime, 52 years now, I have never experienced something that I would describe sincerely as approaching state-run television. And that is what Sinclair Broadcasting, for all practical purposes, is, state-run television. It is what we see in authoritarian countries, not to overstate it, right? We need an independent press. You can agree or disagree with the press. You can like or dislike a given news organization. We can quarrel about what facts are. But the reality is an independent press holding people in power and institutions accountable is a fundamental element of our democracy. And any time that element of our democracy is removed, our democracy suffers. And so the Sinclair thing is about as disorienting as everything else happening today, honestly. We're living at a moment where the attacks on the press are something that I never thought I would see in my lifetime. And the Sinclair thing, I think, is maybe the very best example of that, but unfortunately it's not the only example.
And I will tell you that television stations like mine, every day in the morning meeting and overnight, there are conversations that go on, and people agree and disagree about what should be covered and how it should be covered. But it's all done from the standpoint of local people who understand our local community and what we think is most important to cover in our local community. It's not done from somebody else in another city or another state. And so people in our community, we hope, are getting news that we're covering. We're trying to give you the fair and balanced news of the day that you need to understand. We ask you, we had some audience survey questions. I know that there's a chance. Are we ready to do another one? Is that still working or not? Because I have it on my script. It looks like you've gone home for the night, so. No? Okay. The question then becomes, as you are bombarded with news and information, how do you determine which one you're going to embrace as the one that's going to be more trustworthy? And I know at least at one time we were having a conversation not long ago, and that is that even the Chronicle has a couple of different sites that people can go to, one paid and one not paid, and you get different information. There's truthful, factual information, but you get different kinds of information depending on which site you go to.
And I'm just going to do, can we get a show of hands of people who, when you want to know news from the Houston Chronicle, you will go to chron.com? Yeah, okay. And how many go to houstonchronicle.com? Oh, okay. So the difference is, thank you, some of my colleagues over there, you guys. So I think a lot of people, this was a decision that was made much, much, much higher in the Hearst Corporation. But we have two different websites. One is free and one is paid. And we, as a culture, have to understand that journalism requires money, funding to do. People have to be paid to do this. So not very much, I guess, but historically, but they have to be paid something. So the HoustonChronicle.com website is the one where we have our best journalism. I'm on there, but we have really great investigative reports. And if you go to chron.com, You're going to see a lot of things that, to be careful here, you're going to see a lot of celebrity news, you're going to see a lot of crime, you're going to see some breasts, you're going to see things that, you know, kind of mixed in with the other journalism.
I once saw a story about celebrities with 6 toes on cron.com. That's kind of par for the course, right?
So I'm going to say this, we in Houston, our staff in Houston does not have control over everything that's on that site. It's, but it is frustrating that people associate, you know, the free site with and are not aware of the work that we're doing.
And isn't it corporate profits? I mean, that site, those sites wouldn't be there were it not for an opportunity to gain finances.
Right,
correct?
and I don't want to fault the Hearst Corporation too much because everybody's trying to figure this out, right? So you guys were all very happy, blissfully getting your news for free for a very long time, and even before that, getting newspapers that were subsidized with classified ads and paying hardly anything for it. And now suddenly we're raising your subscriptions, we're asking you to pay a whole lot more than you ever had for news, and it's not working that well. So news organizations are just hungry for a new business model that actually works, and online sales online ads aren't that successful. And so what the Chronicle was trying to do is give people something for free so that they could get some news, right, and then have reefers have a way to click onto this other site where you could pay if you wanted premium content.
Yeah, but let's talk about what that, I mean, I want to put the best face on this. Let's talk about what those 6-toed celebrities are paying for, okay? 3 years ago, Lisa Falkenberg won a Pulitzer. Last year, Brian Rosenthal of the Chronicle was a finalist for a Pulitzer. This week, when the Pulitzer Prizes were announced, again, the Houston Chronicle was a finalist for its coverage of Hurricane Harvey. The Houston Chronicle is a fine newspaper that does great journalism. This stuff does not pay for itself. If we have to endure 6-toed celebrities to get that quality journalism, then I think we're probably all prepared to do it. It's a shame that this is what it's come to. But I just want to be sure people understand that the Chronicle should not be judged by the means of paying for it. The Chronicle should be judged by the quality of its journalism, and in that respect, I think all of us in Texas owe the Chronicle a great debt of gratitude because they're doing great work.
Thank you, Evan. I'm sure my editors are wishing I had just made the statement that you made. So basically, the upshot is everybody get on HoustonChronicle.com and subscribe.
And Cambrell, I would say that there is evidence then, and therefore that there is ethics in media, because it's present here and it's being awarded and recognized. But one of our responsibilities in this world in which we live is that we have to be the ones who identify it. We can't relinquish our responsibility to identify excellence and real news and the kinds of opinions that are going to help us shape our own for the world in which we live. There are many Torah examples I can give you. I'm not going to give you a sermon tonight on that. But the idea is that we can't relinquish our responsibility. There was a day when anchors sat on the news and told us what the news of the day was, and we went to bed at night knowing that that was authentic, verifiable, and reliable. And today, even though it isn't possible always to do it, it does not relieve us of our responsibility to dig very deeply and to pay those higher premium prices to get the kind of news that really is ethical and the kind that we can build our lives on.
Do you think that you cover the kind of news that you know is going to get a bigger audience, or do you cover the kind of news that you know is the best news to cover, the most important news to cover for your community?
We cover school finance and sanctuary cities and transportation, so clearly we're not looking to audience. That's obviously not the issue.
I wouldn't put sanctuary cities in that list.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, the world that exists only in my head is one in which reporting on sanctuary cities generates a huge audience. The reality is the stuff that we do, at least in our case, is very specifically focused on topics that are important for people to know about, where there's not enough reporting on those topics. But this is not about transactional journalism in the sense of reselling eyeballs to advertisers or going for the biggest audience or the most people, because this is public interest journalism. And that's by definition, I think, going to be about the quality of the work and the choices that you make and not about the size of your audience. I'm unconflicted about that. When I ran Texas Monthly and we put the 50 best barbecue restaurants on the cover every 5 years, hell yes, we were going after the biggest audience. And that was a guaranteed winner every time we did it, and we were quite aware of the fact that that's what we were doing. Part of the reason I jumped out of the building of for-profit journalism, forgive me, at the end of the action movie before it exploded, part of the reason I did that was because I no longer wanted to be wedded to those kinds of decisions and those kinds of metrics and do work that mattered regardless of the audience size.
And it is, back in the for-profit business of journalism, it is it's a difficult time right now. I mean, we at the Chronicle, for instance, are being asked to keep track of the metrics, how many clicks our stories are getting. There's not pressure, hey, Lisa, you need to write. Nobody tells me what to write. Nobody at the Chronicle has ever told me what to write in my decade of writing a column, and I value that kind of leadership. But at the same time, we're being told to keep track. So I know how many clicks my columns are getting, and I know if I write about, school finance or something like that, that it's not going to get a lot of clicks. And so I'm going to be honest with you and tell you that I think it does have some, if I'm between two columns, I don't know what to write today, I do think, what are people going to want to read about most? I want to appeal to the widest audience. So to me, it's not just about it. I'm not thinking about money, because that's not my responsibility. But I am thinking about audience and drawing people in. I try to write in a way that's entertaining, that's not going to lose people or make them fall asleep, but I think we've always done that. And so it does make me feel a little uncomfortable to have to pay attention to clicks, but at the same time, as a journalist, I think I can ethically do that and see it through the perspective of a journalist who's always cared about reaching the largest audience, especially as a columnist. I mean, that's what I'm supposed to do, right? I'm supposed to influence policy, and you do that by writing about the people in power and the issues that matter. So every now and then, I have to write about something that's not going to do very well on the website, and I will.
And I think it's almost a bit of a false dichotomy to say it's either going to get the clicks or it's going to be this hard-hitting news. I think that you can create stories that attract audience attention and cover really difficult issues. And if you're covering really difficult issues and no one is clicking on that, that's information that a newsroom should take to heart. What are we doing wrong? How can we cover this better in a more compelling way? So I think that it's actually a really energizing moment potentially for newsrooms if they want to see it that way, as now we can see. We know this story is really not getting a lot of traction. What can we do to do it better and use this not as a reward or punishment for an article doing well or doing poorly, but use it as a jumping off point to say, let's try something else next time.
Right, but I agree with you, and I share your belief that there are ways to do better at the stories that we tell to attract more people. And ultimately, it's a Pyrrhic victory if everything that you do is the tree falling in the forest, right? I get that. But I also think that sometimes you have to do stories that may not get a big audience because they're important enough regardless of that. And I think it's great for us to innovate in the way we still tell stories and to have conversations in newsrooms all the time about ways that we can attract bigger audiences. My point is to sort of start at the end of the conversation, work backwards, and say the goal is not to attract the biggest audience. The goal is to do work that's meaningful and informative and gives people the means to be better citizens. And if in the end that's not work that attracts a big audience, I'd rather take that loss, right? I'd rather not start with the proposition that the goal is to get a bigger audience.
In television, that's not going to work.
No, I understand that. I mean, that's what's great about it is a lot of different models are reflected up here that have the luxury of doing it their way, which is really good.
And the interesting thing about that is that television is evolved so that now we're on air, online, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and all of that counts. We have salespeople who are selling Facebook and those kinds of things, our online content, not Facebook, but click2houston.com, ads are on there. It's clicks, they're all measured. Right. So the challenge is to get as many clicks as you can so you can sell it to the advertiser in the online part and the viewers on the ratings to be able to get that as well. So there is that effort to get those eyeballs. And I can go in right now and look and see how many people have clicked on my Facebook page today. I don't do that very much because I'm at the end of my career, not the beginning, so it doesn't really, I'm sorry, this is live stream. I am excited about trying to get those clicks up. It's what I meant to say. But that's something that we're judged by. We're all judged about how many people are either watching on TV, and if you're not doing that, there how many people are following you on Twitter or going to KPRC2 Cambrell Facebook page. Those kinds of things are what matters. And so you have to figure out, what can I do to make sure that that happens? And hopefully you're doing something that is relevant and what people want to know, but we're also competing in journalism with bloggers and people who just call themselves journalists and they aren't. How frustrating is that for those of you here who have to deal with that comparison to somebody who really has not done the kind of things that they should do to be able to call themselves journalists?
Right. I don't like it when people say, and I think Bob Woodward said this. I'm trying to think of who it was, but I think you hear people saying everybody is a journalist. Today, everybody can be a journalist. And I don't like that because it's not true. Everybody can publish. Everybody's a writer, everybody can, have something to say online, but it's not the same as being a professional journalist and devoting, learning through experience or studying this in school and learning how to critically think through an issue so that you're talking to the right people, you're challenging your own assumptions, your own biases, you know how to vet some fact and find out if in fact it is a fact. If we just don't have any hierarchy of standards in journalism, that's a problem. But yet, I think one of the questions you're maybe leading up to is, should we have standards in journalism? Should we somehow be regulated? Should somebody police, what's a good, what makes the New York Times is reputable, but Breitbart Media is not? And we can't do that either, right? Because then who decides? And you can't define. You can't say these people are reputable, these people aren't, because eventually you'll get to the point where somebody's making that decision who's not ethical or fair and may have, propaganda to sell. So it is difficult. I was speaking recently to a group of teachers about what's fake news and how to help students do research online. And I wanted a site. I went to all these different journalism organizations thinking maybe somewhere there's a list of publications, there's somewhere they can go to just see these are reputable sources. And I couldn't find one. And then I thought, I don't want there to be one.
Well, different people view different sources to be reputable, right?
Right, that's the problem.
Right, this gets back to the idea that there's not one accepted set of facts because different people see different sources as reputable. And there's a perception that somehow we in our business, Lisa, are arrogant enough to think that some of us are credible and authoritative and acceptable. We pass muster and others of us don't. And it's one of the problems with the world now is that people have come to view us as full of ourselves and arrogant, and we probably don't help on that front, honestly. When we make mistakes, we're not particularly humble about it. We're not particularly eager to acknowledge that we've made mistakes or to correct them. The best of us are, but not everybody is. And we're no different than anybody else. We make mistakes along with everybody in every other profession occasionally. Look, I think the problem with the broadened definition of journalism is really a byproduct of the fact that technology, which is cheap and easy to access, has meant that anybody now can communicate with a large audience at the touch of a button. There used to be, you had to associate yourself with a big media institution to have the ability to communicate with people, and now really anybody with a computer or a phone and Twitter can basically be in that same position of being a media brand or a communications brand. And I think that there's necessarily some confusion. Just because somebody can communicate with you doesn't make them a journalist, but that power now exists. It's both terrific and exciting and also a little bit frightening.
And it makes it challenging for those who are the viewers or those who are consuming to understand, who do I believe? We think that we're putting out some pretty accurate information, but who do they believe? That's the challenge going forward.
And I think as we look to social platforms like Facebook, where you have reputable news sources right alongside your friend, right alongside a very not reputable news source, that only compounds all of these problems.
I want to get some questions here because we'll run out of time here for sure. And some of you have written some questions here. One of the questions I have here is, how can media change when the president mocks and disregards the media? How can public fight this? Anybody?
I think the best advice that the media has gotten on this was from Marty Barron, who's the editor of the Washington Post, who, when the president started to attack the media early in his first year in office, and attacked the Washington Post, by the way, not incidentally, quite a lot, Marty Barron said, our job is not to go to war, our job is to go to work. Our job is not to fight with the president. Our job is to answer these charges by doing more and better journalism and by holding this president and this administration, and by the way, everybody in power, accountable. And I think the Washington Post has been an exemplar of that. They do not get baited by the president's comments. They do not spend time arguing over tweets. They report facts. They do accountability journalism, and then they let the public decide whether they're credible or not. And so far, the public has weighed in very heavily on the side of the Washington Post.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think for a long time, the media acted as though they were impervious to the public dialogue and just reporting on it. But now we see the media starting to say, oh, we're an actor in this, and we need to defend ourselves when we're being critiqued. And I think their efforts at defending themselves have been things like increasing transparency. So let's be more transparent with how we're going about our journalism. Let's really show biographies of the reporters that are doing this work. And I think that those efforts to increase transparency so that we can at least agree on the basic principles of doing journalism and reporting are a really important reaction to being critiqued. Just show what you're doing and let the public decide.
And Talia, I think you've mentioned a very important point. The biographies of those who present themselves as journalists is critical. In my world, too, you can't get in front of a congregation and not be authentic and expect to hold the crowd or to build the audience and to be heard and followed. You have to persist in that authenticity. You have to persist in the biography that you bring and present so that you can take even a president of the United States to task for his words, or his communications manager to her word, and be sure that what we walk away with is something that we can rely on. I'm not here as judge and arbiter today, and I share in partly the world of media, but Judaism prides itself on authenticity that is grounded in something that is traditional, enduring, and something that we can always go back to when our world changes in such a way that we're confused or disoriented, as Evan said. It is something that we can go back to and rely on. So the work that each of you do, and that I aim to do with my clergy team too, is something that does take us out of a disorienting world, a world of some absurdity, a word I used recently, and help us to discover that what we've been taught is enduring, and that it can bring us to the place that we want to go.
Lisa, don't you think that the move lately for us to be more transparent about our process in journalism has been a positive? Helps us become
definitely
better trusted and more credible in the eyes of people?
Yes, trust doesn't come without a relationship, right? And so I think that, the newspapers of the past didn't just have trust because they were more accurate. Let's face it, there was a lot of yellow journalism. They didn't just have it because online didn't exist. They had it because they had relationships with their communities. The communities were smaller. They had more staff. They had people who went and sat in the meetings and covered them. And staffs are smaller now. We don't have the people who are out and about as much as we used to be. And I think that affects it as well. I mean, like anything, you need a relationship. I'm out and about, I speak, and I hope that some of you who have never heard of me will go and say, I'm going to read some of her columns, or that you tell your friends and you say, hey, that Lisa Falkenberg woman, she seems like she's got something to say. But without seeing me here tonight, I'm just a name, right? I'm just a name on a paper or a name on a website. Now, I'm something more. Even if you hadn't seen me tonight, I'd be something more. Pictures, bios, emails. We give you more ways to connect with us.
Transparency is good. It brings up mind about Fox News host Sean Hannity the other night, who was named as a client of the president's attorney. And up to that point, Sean Hannity had been a tremendous defender of the president and against the FBI or the prosecutors going in and getting the information. Sean Hannity did not tell his audience that he was a client, and Fox News has said that they're okay with that. That seems to not be the kind of transparency that you're talking about.
Well, imagine if Rachel Maddow had done this. The people who would be complaining the loudest are the people on Fox News. This is weapons-grade chutzpah. This is what happens these days in the political universe, is being outraged about something that you yourself were doing 5 minutes ago, right? This is the way we all roll these days. It's ludicrous to think that anybody would regard that set of facts that you just correctly laid out and not see something wrong.
But the thing is, as my mother always reminds me, but Lisa, Sean Hannity is not a journalist. He says so himself. And
you think most people perceive Sean Hannity not to be a journalist? Most people who watch Fox News, the Fox News audience, I mean, your mother accepted.
Do you guys, see a show of hands, if before I made that comment, you thought Sean Hannity was a journalist? He is perceived, you would say? Yeah, well, anyway, the fact that he has said, look, I'm not a journalist, I'm just some guy trying to help you understand the world. He uses that as some kind of shield, I think. And so he's able to go have dinner with, the president of the White House and do the things that he does, lambaste, the attorney, and then be a client of him at the same time, or defend the attorney and being a client of him. But I know it shouldn't be a difference, but people see that and they think, okay, well, he's got a right to do that. And these are the people who are being lumped into the category journalist, and they're tainting it.
Jonathan Chait of New York Magazine this week, after this came out, wondered aloud whether Fox News should no longer be allowed to be called Fox News, but should just be called Fox. I was sympathetic to that question.
Another question, we have a bunch of them, so let's zip through if we can. Can the media stop framing issues in the polarizing terms of winners and losers? Will this help restore sanity? Interesting. In our business, someone who runs for office, councilwoman, you win or you lose. I think a lot of times that happens in our business. You're a winner or a loser. And I think, I don't see that much locally, but I think nationally there's always a framing of how someone lost if they didn't get what they wanted, how they're the loser and somebody else is the winner. I'm not sure that how easy that is to be able to change the dynamic of what is a natural instinct to people. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think this is hard also from an audience perspective, going to something that we chatted about earlier, which is if you look at what stories do people click on, these frames of winners and losers and conflict and this narrative of this person ascended and became the champion, they draw eyeballs, they draw clicks. These are the sorts of narratives that as humans we find to be compelling, and so I think that there is a reason that this sort of journalism persists, and it should. In some instances, this is a really appropriate story to cover, but I think that it's really challenging to figure out what is the counter-narrative to that. How do you bring a different frame to bear on so many of the things in our electoral system that are winner-take-all?
I have a question here, and I don't, this is something that just, I gotta do it. Who is not on the panel who would have a perspective not shared by the panel, but yet respected by the panel? Which one of you is a deep thinker who wrote this? We're talking about ethics in media, so who is not on this panel who would have a perspective not shared by this panel, but not respected by this panel? First of all, we all have different perspectives, so it would be kind of a challenge to figure out from each one of us what kind of perspective, different, I don't know.
So somebody we respect who doesn't have ethics? That's the question. Because I think we're all defending the idea of journalists having ethics, yeah? So I don't know if there's anybody I would respect who would say it's okay to dilute ethics or not to have them, or to accept people in this group who don't have ethics.
Well, and someone talked about the president and the way that he leads and how we can report on that. What do you do about it when our president is acting like the leader of a banana republic? What he had a good point. He said, we just report. We go to work. We just report what the facts are. We don't put any kind of descriptive adjective on the president's actions as banana republic. That would be incendiary. There's no place in a journalistic piece. So that would be totally out of place.
You know, one thing that does concern me is I've seen the tendency among journalists, professional journalists, to kind of think this is a whole new world now. This is just a new world with Trump president. Nobody ever thought this would happen, and so now we need new rules. You know, now we can violate some of the rules that we had set before. And I have people who write me, a woman who tweeted me a while back, you know what, Lisa, y'all just need to get rid of this this fair and balanced idea that you have to have, you know, quote both sides kind of thing and be fair. We all know the truth. You know, we all know that what's happening is awful and he's a liar, call him a liar, this kind of thing. I think that we need to resist that. There are things that are happening in our country that are very concerning, and the demeanor of the president, the things that he says, the way he conducts himself are very concerning, but we can't change the standards and the rules by which we have always conducted ourselves.
And let me slightly disagree with that. Slightly. New York Times made a decision a little more than a year ago to start using the word lie when describing things that the president said that were objectively false. I don't have a problem with that. I think if you don't call something that the president, or anybody else for that matter, says, if you don't call that a lie or not truthful, then what are you doing? Are you being truthful then? The Times made as a policy a decision to put the word lie in a headline. I believe it was when Donald Trump came out at his hotel late in the campaign and finally acknowledged that Barack Obama was not born in another country, but was an American citizen. And he gave that very kind of clipped press conference where he said, okay, fine, I'll say it. Obama was not born somewhere else. And then he blamed Hillary Clinton for starting the birtherism conversation. And the New York Times came out the following day and reported on the fact that the president had for a long time been lying about the citizenship of the president. And this was a controversial thing. You're right. It's an evolution of the standard, but that's become now, I think, in some quarters acceptable for the simple reason that it is objectively saying what is the case, that the President of the United States or anybody else is saying something that is not true. So I personally don't have a problem with that.
So let's put the word lie into our conversation. And let's look to our Judaism to find out, what does Judaism say about lying at all? First of all, let's go back to the Bible, to the Hebrew Bible. There we learn something that you've heard before in Leviticus. It says, I always say it in Hebrew first, Lo titeh mechshol lifnei iver, do not put a stumbling block before the blind. And it doesn't always mean a physical stumbling block. Obviously, you shouldn't do it. But it also suggests that we shouldn't use information or the lack thereof, or a lie or lack of transparency, etc., to trip up somebody or to cause that person to make a decision based on information that they should have known or should know. You understand. But what's also important is that in the course of our conversation and the society that we're trying to build, there are times when we can't always say the perfect truth about something to somebody either. We call it a white lie. And the Talmud says that a sheker lavan, a white lie, is a sheker kasher, is a kosher lie. Now, I don't want you to run out of the room and say,
I think every lie is treif. Can we just accept that?
Every lie is treif. So here's the difference. Here's a difference. And not only from the Talmud, but from the 19th, 20th century, a wonderful teacher, the Chafetz Chaim, taught that even a sheker gamur, a complete and utter lie, sometimes if it's for the sake of peace, is acceptable. Because you wouldn't always say what is on your mind if it's going to embarrass, publicly shame, or terribly disgrace another human being. For the sake of shalom, for the sake of peace and wholeness and completeness, then we would alter our words to be sure that we can build the community of goodness and trust and reliability. Now, I'm only throwing that out there to challenge us a little bit, not to say that what anybody has done in certain press conferences and those lies is acceptable. First of all, it doesn't meet our standard or our ethic that it builds any source of peace among us, especially between people with different opinions. But understand what our tradition is aiming to accomplish. Sometimes it's better not to say the whole truth and the complete truth because we're trying to save the dignity and the well-being of a person and the community that we're building with others.
I want to stay, though, on this. I want to ask Lisa, if let's take the president out of it. Let's say it's Mayor Turner. Mayor Turner gets up at a press conference and says something that is just flatly not true. What do you think the obligation of the Chronicle is in reporting that in this case?
Once again, this may seem semantics to some people, but I think, of course, we would print that, we would publish it, but we've always had this issue at the Chronicle. We really question using the word lie. And to me, lie is even different than liar, right? Because they are charged. They are charged with emotion, and as the rabbi was saying, they concern someone's dignity, someone's integrity, correct? So I have had situations with editors where I called, I think it was Governor Perry, something that he had lied about, and I used the word lie, and it was taken out, and the word untruth was put. And it seems silly to some people, but the word lie is just so emotional. When I said that earlier, I don't really know how I feel about this. I think that at this point, we've had such a pattern of lies that maybe that standard is okay to change. But I mean, we shouldn't stop doing as much homework. We shouldn't change the tone of our stories and think it's okay just to let this negative tone toward the president seep in. We need to watch that.
I asked Chuck Todd recently, I interviewed Chuck Todd, and I asked him if he believed that the president was a liar, and he quoted the old George Costanza line from Seinfeld. He said, "It's not a lie if you believe it, Jerry." And he said that if the president is guilty of anything, it's that he's more George Costanza. He believes the things he's saying to be true, therefore they're not lies, which I just think is... That's not. I'm not there with Chuck Todd on that.
That's a different word. Talia,
yeah, and that's exactly what happened. So there's all sorts of academics looking into this, and it's something called motivated reasoning, where you think your side is right and the other side is wrong, and we have an incredible human capacity to find that in whatever it is we're reading, whether you're the president or whether you're someone sitting here this evening. These motivated ways of looking at any sort of news and information, whether if a media outlet calls something a lie, reading into that to say, oh, that's not the case, that media outlet is in fact biased. We're just incredibly sophisticated at doing that.
Have a audience comment more than a question regarding Sinclair. It's not Sinclair. It's not similar to government or government-owned or controlled media at all. It's yellow journalism. It's the government losing control and allowing a special interest group to take over. Maybe a combination of both, actually.
Right, but the question, I think, if the government allows this organization to grow to the point where it has this outsized influence, and does it specifically so it can have the outsized influence, which already some of the parameters have been extended here, then I think that's a problem. I think then we can say that the government is supporting this messaging being sent to as many people as possible.
The fact is the Sinclair company is attempting to get the government to loosen the regulations around ownership. Why is Sinclair doing what it's doing? I mean,
and why is the government allowing it? I mean, like I say, there's an investigation right now, so it's not conclusive, but just observing It is troubling. I think you can make that line.
There were a lot of stories earlier in the administration about changes to Radio Free Europe and other kinds of public radios that were government-run radios that had a partisan tone to them that previously did not have.
Did you?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I didn't
Jump in.
No.
I was done.
Oh, okay, that's what I asked. I didn't know you were finished. What I do want to say, what this person may have been trying to point out, though, is recently there was a request by Democrats to to remove the license or suspend the license of Sinclair Broadcasting because of what they had done with the script. And I do think that's wrong. I do think that this is speech. I think that, like I say, there's some regulation that needs to happen here, but I think that script is speech. And I don't agree with the Democrats that they should be sanctioned for it.
Question, if it's about changing public perception to trust the media, how will you stand firm in your true conviction in the long run to work to regain the trust of your audiences? Do the work.
I think every day you publish work that's fair, thorough, and accurate. You treat people who you report on with respect and decency. You listen to all sides, real balance, not false equivalency. I think that the antidote to what's ailing this business is good journalism. The thing that's going to get us back from a credibility and a trusted standpoint is good journalism.
And I'm an eternal optimist. I'm always hopeful that there's going to be a positive outcome to this process, ongoing, consistent, good journalism, coming up with facts so that people can at some point understand what is true and what is not true. At some point, it's incredible to me that there are people who actually believe some of the things that are being pointed out by the administration as being fake news. And it boggles my mind how many people are like, yeah, that's right, that is fake news. When it's like me, or is this white or is it black? This is white.
But I think that, we've had this whole discussion, and I'm just realizing we haven't really discussed what fake news is, right? And it started out, it was fake news was something that was actually manufactured. Some guy sitting on a couch. I think the Washington Post had this fascinating profile on some guys who just sat around all day, and they made stuff up in order to see who they could influence. Maybe they were trying to influence liberals that day, maybe conservatives that day. Was Russian Twitter bots, troll farms. That fake news was actually fake, and the president took it to mean something else. Anybody who disagreed with him basically is doing fake news. And to the point where a couple of weeks ago, I stood at a press conference the day that the Houston Independent School District superintendent had announced his resignation, and the first thing that the school board president said before she began the press conference, which I believe was directed at me, we're so glad that the media has arrived today to cover us, and just so you know, though, we're not going to tolerate any fake news. If you don't treat us fairly, we won't talk to you. And I tried to confront her later and ask, was that aimed at me because I've been writing things critical of your plans? And she said, well, if you think it was about you, then maybe it was. And, basically if I'm feeling fake over here, maybe it was about me. But anyway, so how did we get to the point where a woman who I'm pretty sure politically is not aligned in the slightest with Donald Trump is using his verbiage to explain coverage that, yes, is opinionated, because that's what I do, but is critical of the decisions that she's making. It has permeated our language, our conversations in a way that is troubling. And we have to remember what the word fake means. It doesn't just mean different.
Campbell, I'm feeling, I don't know how many of you are either, and I think I value the question that was raised about who else might be on this panel. Because there is a sense that many of us are so agitated by what's going on that the topic of this evening seems like such a natural. I'll tell you that as a rabbi serving in a large congregation, a rabbi serving in a large congregation is going to have an audience that isn't monolithic in their point of view. So how do I preach to the left or to the right of the aisle and maintain the balance of the congregation? One of the brilliant features of Jewish thought, and certainly you find it in the essence of the Talmudic debate, is that rabbis there, and many of us are, we aim to be trained to handle two opinions at once in our mind and to hold it in tension and to say, I can see where you're coming from or the opinion that you hold. I can also see, understand, explain the opinion that you hold over here, and to find the common ground that validates both points of view so that we all go home, at least the Torah says we go home in peace. It's one effort to be sure that your congregation comes back next week, or at least renews their dues for another year. But it may be an ethical exercise, if not an attempt in this very disturbed world of media, where perhaps in the news, in the reporting, in all those different places, to say from time to time, I think I hear you, I think I understand you, and even to include some of the opinion, but ultimately to arrive at a conclusion that brings a little bit of this and a little bit of that and the higher arch of what we want to aim to do together. Because we can talk about the different points of view, but if we don't aim for something new, we're not going to get off of square one. And I think part of our effort tonight, with the brilliance of this panel, is to understand that ethics in the media is still available to us, but we're going to have to go and get it again and reclaim it. And maybe we can go back to some old-fashioned methods of appreciating two points of view in order to arrive there.
I have time for one more question, and I have like 900 of them. What are the common facts? No, I don't want to do that one.
Sorry, whoever that was.
So this is a Chronicle question. I'll give it to you. You can answer that later. I don't quite understand it. We want to do that one. You know, a couple of questions about corrections and how to make things right when you do something that's wrong. The one question here is, if the Chronicle is not allowed to partake in partisanship, how are they allowed to endorse certain presidential candidates? See, that's a different question. And the editorial board does that as opposed to the news coverage, correct?
I'm sorry, I was
The Chronicle is not allowed to participate in partisanship. How are they allowed to endorse certain presidential candidates?
Right. And I'm sorry that this is still in 2018 confusing to people. I understand how it can be. So there's the news organization, and then there's the editorial, the opinion organization. And I'm especially confusing because I'm a hybrid. I'm a news reporter on a news page, but with an opinion. Now, there have always, this isn't anything new actually, there have always existed news columnists. But the editorial board alone is allowed to interview candidates, make endorsements, express opinions on that page that are pretty purely opinion. I do a lot of reporting. Sometimes I have a lot to say about an issue. Sometimes I turn it over to an expert, and kind of the whole thing is what they think about something. Today I did something that was really strange, kind of a feature on a woman I found fascinating, and at least one of our attendees, I asked her what she thought. It was interesting. I don't think she liked it too much. But anyway, it is confusing. But that department alone is able to express opinion. Besides me, everybody else in the newsroom is reporting facts. That's what they're doing. They're getting sources, they're attending meetings, they're doing interviews and reporting based on that.
Before we all leave, I want to give everybody a chance to make a comment, if you will, about what you think is going to be the answer to what seems to be a journalistic slide, if you will, in the view of a lot of people who are partaking in media. Media and journalism are not necessarily the same thing, but what will we need to do as journalists to change the dynamic so that we become more of a positive representation as opposed to what now is kind of sliding toward a negative?
Well, I think we've said it, do the work. People don't care about, how a journalist feels about being criticized by Donald Trump. We need to make sure that we do the best job possible, be transparent, let people know who we are, how to reach us, how to point out our errors, and we need to correct our errors. I will say this is a fascinating question. I'm going to try to address it really fast. Somebody said that once they heard a former editor of the Chronicle, Jeff Cohen, say, quote, "The role of the Chronicle is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable," unquote. This person who's writing says, "Since then, I cannot trust the Chronicle to report the facts." So what Jeff was saying is something I think most of us up here agree, and this is to look at those who have the power and to question them, to hold them accountable, to take them to task for their decisions. And then comfort the afflicted means those who are suffering, the voiceless, who have no voices, to take up their causes and try to make things better for them, whether we're talking about human rights violations, whether we are talking about constitutional violations, children in the Texas foster care system who come out more damaged than they went in. Those are the afflicted who we are trying to expose the problems of and try to help them. But I can understand how you can listen to this and think those people are biased toward the negative. We are. That's what we do. We seek out the negative, the bad that's happening. We look for it. Why? So we can fix it. I think that is why, I don't mean to speak for everybody, but that's why I'm in this business, to make the world better. And so that's what that quote means.
If that's in fact a Jeff Cohen quote, I'm Team Jeff Cohen 100% as far as
he always says this, actually.
As far as that goes, I absolutely agree that is, I do not hear that quote and think that means that the paper is negative or biased. I think that's a pretty good articulation one way. You might say it a different way of what the job of journalism is. Look, I'm going to be optimistic at the end here and say that I think the most important thing going forward is to be sure that the next generation of people who do our work are properly trained with all the tools and all the ethics and all the standards to take the baton from us old people and carry this profession forward into the future. We have a newsroom full of very young journalists, probably the average age in our newsroom. We have 75 people working at the Texas Tribune right now. We probably have an average age of about 25 or 26.
And they're outstanding.
And I think they're amazing, and they haven't learned bad habits yet, so there's nothing that we have to break them of, right? But behind that cohort of young, amazing reporters are a group of college students. The dean is here from the Moody College at UT. We get a number of wonderful students who are sophomores and juniors and seniors in college who work with us, who embed with our newsroom every semester. We take about a dozen students across the organization every semester. We pay them. We train them, we teach them how to report, we give them the tools that they need to then go off into the world and be the great journalists that they want to be and that the world needs now. And I believe that the next generation is so well positioned to do right by this profession and do right by their communities. And it's our obligation at our organizations to ensure that we provide them with the training and the support and the positive role models, the best practices, to enable that. I'm not worried about journalism, and I'm not worried about our communities. If we just do our best work and keep our eyes on the ball and be sure that the people who succeed, all of us on the stage, are properly prepared to do it, I think it's all going to be fun.
Talia?
And And what I would add to that is I think that the news media have to think about how they're going to engage in this modern media environment. I don't think it's enough to do the same thing that you've always done because trust is at a low. Something has to change. And I think one of the really powerful things that news media organizations are doing and should continue to do is to engage with the public, to tell people about what they're doing, to show up to events like this one, to say, look, we're really trying to do these things in our newsroom, and we have these ethical standards. And as director for Center for Media Engagement, I think that this form of engagement is the best way to restore trust between audiences and news organizations and propel this industry forward.
Great. Well, the rabbi always gets the last word, nearly. But Lisa, I so appreciate you mentioning the quote from Jeff Cohen. He obviously learned very well from his Jewish upbringing somewhere. We are, as we call ourselves Israel, Israel means to wrestle with God, to wrestle with faith, to wrestle with the things that seem enduring. And we have to agitate ourselves sometimes to see that from different points of view and more clearly. And I agree with Evan that we have to be excellent in what we do, not just in the pulpit, not just as columnists, but we really have to train people to understand the enduring values that will persist. And this crazy era of disorientation may linger, it may leave some residue, but I think the underlying and enduring values will persist. And I also agree that there are different venues for learning. I'll share with you just very briefly. In the Mishnah, there are 4 kinds of learners. I'll tell you about 2. One is a sponge. You learn everything, you soak it in, and you're not discerning or discriminating in any way. It's not the best kind of learner, even if we were taught to get 100% on every test that we ever took. But the best kind of learner is a sieve. So we have to engage in different programs and learn from different outlets of news reporting to hear the other side and discern for ourselves what is really the best way forward for ourselves and to understand our neighbor also. And though fences make great neighbors, we have to understand what's happening on the other side as well. I am, too, very optimistic. I believe in my younger colleagues who are learning and training and aiming to do their very best in what they do. And I think the younger generation truly wants the very best for themselves, just as we want it for ourselves, and we want for the greater nation as a whole.
Thank you.
I thought I would come up with something really witty to say after this, but wow is about all I could say. Thank you all so very much for... This is a difficult conversation. I had people nodding, I had people shaking their heads, but that's what it's about. Unless you understand what's going on, you can't make a decision because you don't see different sides. So on behalf of all of us and the congregation, we have a token of our appreciation, and also we made a donation in your honor. It's very, I think one of you, maybe Talia, talked about how do we help our students, and it's called the New Literacy Project. It's dedicated to giving students in grades 6 through 12 the tools, tips, and resources to learn how to tell fact from fiction. And I think that, to me, is the next generation coming up. And again, thank you so much for everything you've done. Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to tonight's program. Thank you, all of you. With the sun having set, we officially begin our celebration of the 70th anniversary of the State of Israel, holiday known as Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Independence Day. Thank you, everybody, and good night.